I call this meeting of the Beaufort County Board of Education Finance Committee meeting to order. The time is 4:35. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Committee members present today, Richard Geyer, myself, Dr. Wisniewski is absent today. Ms. Crosby is with us, and board members Earl Campbell and John Dowling, and additional staff. We have a motion to approve today's agenda.
So moved.
All in favor? Unanimous. Okay, first up, public comments. We have no members of the public here in attendance today. All right, first up on our agenda, approval of the November 14th, 2019 committee minutes. Motion to approve? All in favor? Robin, had anybody sent you any corrections? I didn't see anything that needed correcting. Okay. All right. The Procurement Advisory Committee discussion. Actually, if you look at our procurement code, the correct title of the committee would be the Procurement Policies Advisory Committee. So we might want to tweak that going forward. If we wanted to abbreviate it, it would be the PPAC. I sent to Dick and Rachel a summary of the speaking points from our last Finance Committee meeting. We're beginning to build a framework of what that committee might look like. And everyone should receive, or should have received, a copy of the email and the 6 bullet points we're working with thus far. That was everything that was discussed. Dick, can you think of anything beyond those points that we might have touched upon? The scope of the committee, I believe we said we would lift directly from the procurement code itself. So, specifically, the language to form the committee. Let me get to that. Bear with me a moment. Okay. I don't know why I'm having trouble finding this. It's the page where, I found it. Okay, it's page 14 of the procurement code. We could lift the language directly, Dick, for the scope, procurement policies, advisory committees. And ours would be the first bullet point, which specifically says purchasing policies and procedures, advisory committee, tasked to discuss the purchasing performance, discuss the performance of public purchasing and to consider specific methods of improvement. I would just lift that verbiage exactly. Unless the committee would like to recommend to the full board additional verbiage, that would certainly be the safest for what the scope.
Yeah.
It's overly simplified.
When we discussed this was discussion that happened before we had the governance.
Yeah.
We had a governance talk and vote on the 19th, I believe.
Okay.
So it was before that vote. And when I'm looking at this, the full board, I went with the strategic model, which is, what's the other name for it called?
Cohesive. Cohesive,
Cohesive?
I believe.
Is that the other,
Coherent.
Coherent governance.
And when I look at that,
Yeah.
it puts a bit of a different spin on this issue. You know, we were given a sample of a policy guide used by Horry County. And when I look at that, and I look at the general thing that board job description, governing policy shall address results, intended outcome for students, and operational expectations, statements of the board's value about operational manners delegated to the superintendent, including both actions and conditions to be accomplished and those prohibited.
Yeah.
Now, when I go to the financial piece, specific in the policies there in financial administration, it says the superintendent shall, and that's a payroll. Number 2, assure all purchases are based on competitive prices of items of similar value, including consideration of both cost and long-term quality. Number 3, use a competitive bidding procedure for the purchase of all supplies, contractual services, materials, equipment, except as approved for exception in the procurement code as provided by the procurement code through a sole source or emergency procurement method. And it goes on with other things.
Yes.
This seems to be in conflict with what you have here as what this board, this procurement policy framework, or procurement policy, what is it, AC, what's the?
Advisory
Committee.
That's what our procurement code calls it. I just
Right,
use the same
right,
title.
right.
Yeah.
And see, I see this as having a committee that ensures that the language that we have in our policy is along the same line. And I'm reading this and I said, this committee would be selected and reporting to the board. And that seems to be in contradiction to what is outlined in the governance. It would seem to me this committee would be selected and vetted and reporting to the superintendent with information provided to the board. Now,
Well, let me ask you this. So, how do you perceive the superintendent's newly constructed community committee?
same way.
Same way, that it's optimal because he forms it as opposed to the board.
Right.
But the problem is, in the procurement code, it says the following advisory committees may be established by the board or the superintendent. So it does give us the
Just
flexibility.
Right.
And also for the superintendent.
And the superintendent.
Dr. Rodriguez could come in tomorrow and say, I'd like to form that. But we're the keepers of the procurement code, so ultimately the board gets to establish the policies and everything that's in there.
I understand.
So I'm looking up, since you used Horry County as an example, and they're very similar to us, I'm looking up their procurement code.
Mhm.
And if that verbiage that you read might not have just been simply lifted from their procurement code, it sounds like it was, but I wouldn't know. Can you send that? Oh, it's in the handout, right? I have the handout, never mind.
Yeah.
Now, I may not have time to look it up now, but the procurement code exists and all of the freedoms within it, regardless of our governance model. that we choose.
I agree.
So help me understand a little more where you see the conflicts
Yeah.
in this.
For us to pick these people, it could be done. First of all, it's gonna take a lot of work to go out and do this. Not that we can't do it, but it's gonna take some work. It's gonna take some staffing, it's gonna take some support, because if you have a committee, they've gotta have support to do their work, and that would have to come from board assets, I assume. And for the same reason, the oversight committee for the referendum is chosen by the superintendent, I believe this committee should be chosen by the superintendent, supported by the superintendent, and reported to the superintendent, but also reporting to the board, just as the advisory committee is going to do on the referendum.
Okay.
So that's a bit of a different.
Oh, it's very
Yeah,
different.
yes.
Oh, yeah, it's very
Yes.
different. It's a shame Rachel's not here.
Yeah, I understand.
To hear this, because this is quite a shift from what we discussed earlier. So let me see if I understand what you say correctly. That you would prefer to see the superintendent form this committee, select its volunteers, and have this committee report to the superintendent, but then also report to the board as well.
You see, I see some really great benefits for this, not only as an oversight, but also as a partnership possibilities. You see, if we gave it to the superintendent, I would encourage the superintendent to contact his counterparts at the air station, at Paris Island, at the hospital, and other agencies that have the same type of scope, and say, let's come together and have a procurement. We'll serve on yours, you serve on ours, and we could share best practices, because we deal with the same vendors. We have much of the same issues that we've got to deal with. And so that would be a great meeting to get a lot more than an isolated group that just met with us, and that's it.
Well, they wouldn't just meet with us. Their meetings would be with us according to this proposal.
Right.
So that everything, all the exchanges, the discussions, the recommendations can be documented and recorded in the minutes.
Right.
Okay, we've got to, you have to
That's right.
follow the FOIA process.
Absolutely.
But their report would come to the full board. They would report to the board.
Yeah.
Now, the group would have to, the plan would have to first be approved by the full board. And then the volunteers that were selected would then decide how often they would want to meet in this context,
Right.
and how often they would like to deliver reports to the board. Now, we have our teacher advisory group, whatever name that is, and there's no regular schedule for them.
Right.
So they bring reports directly to the board. This would be similar. I think with Rachel absent, she may have different feelings about
Sure,
this.
absolutely.
And with only two here
Right,
today,
right.
we may not be able to bring a recommendation
I
to the
think-
board just yet.
I agree.
But your input is very respectfully received. I think you made some excellent points, and I certainly will consider them. And, John, I'm sorry, I didn't see you over there.
Not to, I'm not being critical of your proposal, but what I see happening is words are important. Part of the confusion around the superintendent's referendum oversight committee is that it should not be using the word oversight whatsoever. It's a review board, okay? Oversight is a non-delegable power of the board, okay? A board, it's my understanding, my limited understanding, that this would not be a group to get together and say, how do we do better procurement? I thought this group would be getting together to say, are we following the procurement code? There's a difference.
Well, let's read the wording from the code, okay? It's, the following advisory committee would review purchasing policies and procedures tasked with discussing the performance of public purchasing and the consideration of specific methods for improvement. That's what they're doing as citizens. That's the verbiage here. We could expand it. We could even make it more narrow. But that would be the safest because it's lifted directly from our code. That would be the safest for starters.
The trap is when you have a committee reviewing its own operation. It's kind of like auditing yourself. Okay. I think that a committee, advisory group, a review board, whatever, that reports to the superintendent ought to be, that's the superintendent's business. It does not relieve the board and its committees from the responsibility of providing objective oversight to whether the operation is going. So I get, when I hear the idea, I think the idea of a community group, educational district community group, consortium to get together and talk about best practices and everything, to me that is really separate and distinct from what the intent of this committee is.
I disagree.
Because what I don't hear is what would be in place of the oversight that you're giving away by doing that.
You see, I go back to its results.
You know,
It's
because
results that the board
Well,
has to be dealing with.
the Horry County thing is nice, but you can have a one-sentence policy that says the district will follow the procurement code. And then your whole future depends on whether the procurement code is written properly.
I hear you, and I understand your point. I don't agree that the board is the policeman or this oversight is at a macro level. It is not focused down into the micro day-to-day operations of how the purchasing happens in this district. I don't agree with that. I believe we look at the big picture, the big results. Are we getting ripped off because we're not competing yet? Well, that's a big deal. If we're not, if we're giving out contracts to friends and neighbors, that's a big deal. But that's a big deal. It's not getting down into the eaches.
But I think there's something in the middle between the two extremes you're talking about. I remember you and I talking about at length about the idea of monitoring budgets on a periodic, monthly or quarterly basis.
Let me interrupt here, okay? I think this might help. Page 14 of the procurement code, board oversight. The Board of Education as a whole shall consider and decide matters of policy within provisions of this code, including those referred to it by the superintendent. The Board of Education, not superintendent, the Board of Education shall have the power to audit and monitor the implementation of its policies and the requirements of this code. It's very plain. The authority is squarely given to the Board of Education. Non-delegation, the Board of Education shall not delegate its powers to promulgate policies. Authority to promulgate policies. The Board of Education has the ultimate authority and responsibility to promulgate policies governing the procurement, management, control, and disposal of any and all supplies, services, equipment, and construction to be procured by the district. Such policy shall be binding in all procurements made by the district. So this spells out the authority and duties. To me, that's the most important word. This is our duty to the Board of Education, not the superintendent. And that's, that's laid out early on in the code, page 14. So if we're responsible for the development of these policies, I like an extra set of eyes to lend their perspective from those who have worked in procurement. And it's not to say we're going to adopt their advisement or their observations. Any community member can walk in here tomorrow and give their observations.
Okay.
And I'm gonna listen to it. Will it result in a vote outcome? Maybe, maybe not. But that's really all this is. It's another set of eyes. People love these community groups. They feel included. They feel, the community group that developed the project list for the referendum was largely a success. There were some detractors, but it was mostly well received, okay? This group by the superintendent, some are claiming that attributes to the passage, that can be attributed to the passage of the referendum. So that's really all this is. It's a continuation of that. I do respect your ideas though, and I will look forward to discussing it more when Rachel's here.
Yeah.
And we'll see, how it fleshes out.
Yeah.
But again, well received. I think you make some good points. And I'm also gonna look up Horry County's procurement code and just see what's in there and stack it up with that handout, because that's a good thing. Yeah,
I looked it up and it's identical to ours.
it's
in that
identical
section.
to ours, okay. So,
In those areas.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I don't know.
So Dick, do they only have one policy pertaining to, in that,
Yeah, that's it.
yeah, that's it, just one?
This- it's financial administration, financial planning,
Mm-hmm. Oh, so they.
personal administration, and there's one more,
Okay,
asset protection.
yeah,
Those are, and they're one pagers.
they're one pagers, so they have more than we do. And that's relatively pared down, I think. They have more than we do.
But again, you're always looking at results.
Yes, that's the focus with
That's the
co-
focus, is the
coherent
results.
governance.
So the policy of how it is executed.
Yes.
And how it's, that's something that I could see a committee looking at how this is done. What results are you looking at, and how often do you get those results? You see, that's the unknown here, and I think that meets John's issue here, is what are the results, what are the report outs, how often, how detailed, and so on. That's really makes this have teeth, if you will.
Mr. Campbell was waiting, go ahead, Earl.
Are we talking about the committee to look at our procurement code or the state?
It's our procurement code. Here it is, Earl, if you want it.
It's right here too.
Oh, okay, wow, that's got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right.
And that's in our code right now.
So ours is almost like South Carolina code also? I mean, a lot of it address what's in the South Carolina code, right?
Yes, sir. It's
Yeah.
substantially similar to the state.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you.
So, was there any talk, I missed the last session, the presentation on coherent governance, and this could be a good question, a good line of questioning when they come back. Is there any conflict between enacting everything required in the procurement code with our governance model? I can't imagine there would be. I mean, we're bound to comply with the procurement code
Right.
and everything within it.
Right.
So, that's a good line of questioning for them.
The other route perhaps
Yeah.
is how often is this necessary to have this committee meet and report out? Is this a annual thing that you look at? Is it a biannual? Is it a quarterly? Is it a monthly?
The committee members would decide.
Yeah, they
They'll
just-
decide
right.
how many times they want to
Right.
meet and how many times they wish to report to the board.
Yeah.
And I think they need to have that flexibility
Yeah.
because they would be submitting Freedom of Information Act requests. I like that that's a more stringent guideline to this committee versus the referendum committee. So, like the teachers group, there is no set schedule. They come before us when they have something of importance that they need to share. So they would be able to have that flexibility. Okay. Are there any other questions or speaking points on this issue? Wendy gave us the, her, yeah, sorry.
Actually, the teachers group comes quarterly.
Is
Yes.
that said?
Yeah, yes, ma'am, that's, I believe,
It's
They
moved?
said that they would come up quarterly.
Excellent. I didn't realize that. So Wendy Cartledge gave us the conflict of interest certification form that was requested of the committee for any members who might participate in this committee, just as Dr. Rodriguez's referendum committee would be signing the same sheet. So the same commitment would be there. You wouldn't have any input that was tainted because of outside involvement. And again, remember, these are volunteers. They're citizens. They have no influence other than to offer their opinions and insights. Even this committee can't do anything. We're powerless. All we can do are bring recommendations to the full board. So I see the risk in this very low. Look at this scenario. You could have a committee form itself outside of this public body, and they can do all this research themselves. They can submit FOIA requests. They don't need our invitation or our agreement to form such a oversight or watchdog committee. They're out there with or without our approval. But this brings them in and we include them in this process. So anyway, so that's that. I don't think we need to approve this form or make a recommendation to the board to approve this because Dr. Rodriguez is already using it. So wouldn't you agree, Dick? I mean, I don't see anything there. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
On this particular topic?
Yes, on this topic.
Again, we have, when this policy committee is formed, and I believe there should be one formed, that when they're formed, we have to ensure, and we've got a written statement here, that they have current experience and not people that have never dealt with credit card purchasing on a large scale. You know, it's got to have people that understand the current purchasing environment. They can't be just
Parent experience required.
enthusiastic amateurs.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when we seek their bios.
Right.
Now, we solicited input, one more point on this, from the board when I did the last finance report to the board, asking each board member to submit one or two folks with a brief bio to the finance committee members who might be interested. I haven't received any, Dick hasn't received any, and Rachel has not received any. So at this point, I got someone, I've been collecting bios. One of my picks has been selected for Dr. Rodriguez's committee, so I had to look to a second source. So I've had a few. We said they did not need to be geographically centered with each of our districts, just qualified folks. So,
And I've had some people that I've talked to, and all of them want more details.
okay.
You know.
So I think the next step would be to have our third committee member here decide on the scope, type it out completely. And these operational points, how the committee would operate within that framework. And what might be helpful is to see Dr. Rodriguez's guidelines for how he's running that committee, to see if he's doing something that, you know, we could try to mirror that as much as possible. Robin, do you have his guidelines? Is there anything formal, structured?
I don't have anything,
Okay.
so I would have to ask.
Okay, would you please? Would that be helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a good model right now to go with. So at this point in time, there are no motions to bring anything forward to the board, any recommendations, any other additional topics, comments on this.
Folks that's on the committee, he wants folks with financial background.
Financial background, procurement background, backgrounds in purchasing and understanding, you know, the laws surrounding, you know, the various types of RFPs and RFQs and those guidelines, sealed bids. You know, the board is lacking some of that information, and we're fortunate to have great procurement folks in the house. But this is just a different perspective from community members who might also bring, you know, some experience to the table. So I would certainly like to see a few more volunteers come forward
I
on
have two
this.
people out, get some information.
Excellent, thank you. All right, if there's no more discussion on that topic, let's move on to, this is a budget shortfall discussion that was prompted by Mr. Guyer, so you have the floor.
Right, and I see this, the letter, is that written by the staff?
Yes.
Permissible uses of revenue collected in excess of appropriation. As you know, Mr. Becker believes that the millage rate for this year, which is only a $0.5 greater than it was 2 years ago, is still going to generate in excess, I've heard as much as $10 million more than our budget that was given to us by the county council. That is, I believe, an optimistic projection, because it's just that, a projection. But if it doesn't happen, what they are concerned about and the treasurer is concerned about, that any excess would have to be then turned into or refunded to the taxpayers, which could mean thousands of checks sent. And of course, they are not really interested in doing that. Secondly, what we're asking for is, since we had the shortfall last year, we're asking that it be, any excess be given to the district for the purposes of its general fund reserves that have been depleted because of under millage the previous year. And Tanya, there is precedent to do this, is that not correct?
Yes, we have never encountered a situation, since I've been with the district, that there have been an excess in tax collections where they were issued refunds, and they may also be, the law, the code says that, or transferring the excess to a segregated fund to be credited to the taxpayers in a future year. So that's another option is there. So the district has never experienced that, to my knowledge, in the past, in years where we collected more than was budgeted. So there is precedent, yes.
But we need clarification. This letter is asking for clarification.
And a waiver, it's asking for one, a clarification, and two, a waiver. So, so
Because
who wrote this letter? That's a good one.
I requested
Okay.
Mr. Saunders.
Okay.
I delegated that
Looks to be
responsibility.
well written. So in order for this to be sent out, well, are we looking for the board to direct Dr. Rodriguez? Because it's only his signature line, it's not coming from the board
Right,
chair.
Right. Remember, we had a motion that said we would look at all means necessary
Yes.
to cope with the
Mhm.
shortages that we experienced last fiscal year. So this is really one way of doing, one strategy of doing it. It's not the only strategy, but we tried to get a surcharge,
Yes,
and the surcharge was not approved by the county council.
correct.
So this is a second.
Alternate.
Yes, yes.
This is an alternate. I think the full board should look at it. Let's take some questions or comments. Anyone on this? I'm not ready to make a recommendation, but I think it should certainly get in front of the board as soon as possible.
Could you put it on the agenda for your committee report and a possible vote during the full board meeting on 6th or 9th of January, is it? 7th of January? Because we need to get.
Agenda setting is next Monday, so.
Yeah, we need to get this, it doesn't do any good to send it out now before the holidays, and nothing's gonna get done. So,
So, Robin, have the officers talked about adding this to the board agenda? Or for the
No.
next agenda, do they,
The officers.
Are they aware
This is
of
just,
this?
this is just coming to this committee first, correct?
okay,
No
Yeah.
one else has been made
No
aware.
one else has
The
seen it,
superintendent
okay.
has reviewed the document.
okay.
That's all. I shared it with.
Well, let's see here, it seems to me, if the full board is gonna discuss this and potentially vote on it, to endorse it and direct the superintendent, that this would have to be on an agenda, a full board agenda. I can say that in my report that we looked at it and we received it, but no recommendations are offered at this time.
one of the time-sensitive pieces to this.
Just gonna grab the water, excuse me.
One of the time-sensitive issues is our funds from this ad valorem tax come in starting this month and January. And what I have been told is that the county treasurer, as soon as what is it, $254 million, is that our state, our local?
Yes. Local is 150.
Yeah, here, that's right, here it is, the property tax is $149,707, $707,242. When she gets that amount of money, stops, and it sits in the treasurer's fund to be dispersed either back to the taxpayers or whatever, so that, we could hit that mark at the end of January, right?
Yes.
Well, we have no power as a committee to do anything.
Oh, I understand,
You know,
I'm just saying, that's
the
why
timeline.
we need to
Mhm.
have this brought up on the first January meeting, because if we're gonna get it out, we need to get it out by the second week in January at least.
John?
In your request to the officers to put this on the agenda, would you consider asking them to make sure that this letter is disseminated promptly to all board members well in advance of the meeting? Now, they're meeting on the 16th of December to set the agenda for the 7th of January.
Good.
There's lots of time in between there. This letter will require study and will generate questions that may take some time to get answered. before we have a meaningful board discussion.
Fair.
Additional comments? Anything? So Dick, when you made the suggestion at our last meeting, is this letter what you had in mind, Emily? Okay. Now, would staff like to comment on it, add anything additionally to what's in the letter, or?
I don't have anything.
All right, so, because our board officers set the agenda in collaboration with Dr. Rodriguez and staff, I'm assuming they'll see this as a priority based on Mr. Geyer's
Are you asking for
presented
this to go, you want me to
timeline.
put this on the list for the agenda? If this is coming,
I'm not recommending anything. The officers set the agenda, and they work with Dr. Rodriguez and staff, and I'm assuming that'll take place there. But I do appreciate reviewing this for information today, and I agree with Mr. Dowling that the rest of the board would need to have it in their hands as soon as possible, so they can be prepared with questions.
it's in
and-
board docs.
Excellent.
So it's in
Okay.
board docs under
Good.
finance.
So they can come to the next meeting prepared with questions and having touch bases with, whoever they needed to speak with. So, all right. All right, moving on, if there's no more discussion to future agenda topics. Dick, do you have any?
Well, it's really an operational event, so I'm not sure of any, the thing about the architects and getting the architectural piece going, getting the architects hired and the prioritization of work for the initial bonding, that's an operational.
Yeah, that's
committee.
operations
That's really
committee.
not us.
Yeah,
They're trying to set a meeting, David sent something out to try to set a meeting next week, so I was waiting for a response from William and John.
I put back my date today.
Now, our financial counselor, our financial advisor and our bond counsel, is that a topic that we should be addressing in a future meeting?
well, at this juncture, it looks like it's been determined. How
No.
so?
Well, we had a vote, but we didn't get into the specifics of when we were going to get out a request for proposal for competitive, there's no time frame yet. We got an end date to have it done, but there's nothing that says when we're gonna start, how we're gonna, remember, we talked about doing it the same way we did choosing the superintendent. So the board is involved, right?
Search firm.
And like the search firm, same type of thing. Is that,
So you solicit applications.
but I think the finance committee should be looking at the time frame and kind of when we do this, how long it's gonna take, how we're gonna structure the process, because it hasn't been done, right?
Well, we can follow the same process as the superintendent
Superintendent.
search firm committee. So we would have a request for a solicitation, basically, but just send it out to those that within the state that offer bond counsel services. We would have to write a scope of work, so that would be the first step, and then we could build a timeline based on a recommendation.
Here's my concern why the time framing is very important. I had the unfortunate occurrence of having a bid contested. When the bids were taken and the award was made, one of the non-selectees contested the bid And that held us up for 6 months because it was in court and everything. And that could be a very bad thing for have that happen. That's why, to me, getting started on this as soon as possible or after the first year is something that we should be thinking about.
It will be a board-issued RFP.
It won't be an RFP, the motion was an informal solicitation for, following a procurement exemption, so, very simple, but the process will be almost identical, to an RFP process.
Yeah, I think it would be confusing things if we continue to call it an RFP.
Yeah,
because it's not.
right, it's not.
So, all right, so.
But the same possibility of having a selection,
Yeah, I think we're getting a little outside the boundaries of just, we're trying to identify what the topic will be, but we're also discussing it, we can't do that.
yeah.
Because it's a full board matter, again, I would see that as a full board issue.
All I'm saying is that.
What sort of recommendation could we
The
provide?
the recommendation from this committee would be something that we should discuss at a future board meeting, is what kind of time frame is needed to ensure that we have somebody in place by 30
Okay,
June.
all right, so the request for an agenda topic for the next finance committee meeting would be bond counsel, solicitation timeline. And also, do we need to add our auditor timeline to that? 'Cause
The
we're real
auditor
late.
won't be going through the committee or the board, will come to the board with a final
Okay,
recommendation after the
Excellent.
committee makes their recommendation.
Okay.
So
that's
that
how
will
it
be
works.
going out, so you would be receiving it in this early spring, late winter timeframe.
Okay, so bond counsel solicitation timeline. Okay, that's an excellent. Let's see, I'm looking at our work plan. Tanya, it doesn't look like you have anything in December or January. We've got a few other items, but they're not under your umbrella. Just a point about future agendas. In January, we begin with our 2 meetings a month. And this was board approved, so we've got to continue with it now. The second Tuesday in January, which I believe is the 14th, will be solely dedicated to policy development. And the second Thursday is the 16th, and that would be our regular meeting where we would tackle such as the agenda item that Dick just mentioned. I still have not received a firm commitment that Wendy will be working with us for policy development once a
Really?
month.
I thought that was so good.
When was that given, Dick?
I thought it was when we mentioned it with Dr. Rodriguez here.
Dr. Rodriguez has not attended our finance committee meetings. He attended one thus far this year. But was it at a board meeting? Where was
I
that?
think when you made the report, I
It
think
was,
they,
yeah,
it's when you made a
the full-
report
full
to,
board.
to the full board.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I can go back and listen, so he committed Wendy to that the second Tuesday every month. Excellent, that's all I need to know, because
I'm pretty sure.
we're
it was-
clearly going to need her guidance. That's it for now. I'm sure we may have additional topics added to, Rachel may have something for the second meeting in January.
So the January 14th meeting will be held here, the January 16th at the library if available.
Correct. All right.
Do you have a time on those yet?
We do. What did the motion say? One was 5:30, one was 5 PM. We have to go back to the
5:30
motion.
is the January 14th.
Hilton Head, okay.
No. 5:30 is the district office one.
Oh, okay, 5:30 is the DESC on the
The
16th.
16th is a regular 5 o'clock.
Oh, 5 o'clock.
16th at the Hilton Head Library, if available.
At 5.
Gotcha.
Okay.
The Tuesday's at 5:30 here.
All right. Is there any more discussion?
No?
Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Merry Christmas to anybody I'm not gonna see between now and Christmas.
Merry Christmas,
Or
John.
happy holidays or happy Hanukkah, whatever you do.